Peter Cowley.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. We will get into all of your incredible story and your background as an angel investor. And I mean, the list in front of me is absolutely incredible. But one thing I want to start on, a little bit of a link that you and me both have. We've both summited Mount Kilimanjaro.
We really? Okay.
So I did it when I was 16, so slightly earlier. But what was that experience like for you? I have to ask.
Yeah, so I did it when I was 39. Was I 40 or something? Yeah. Oh, some people were going up for their 50th, so it's some friends. So I was 48. I went up with my 18-year-old son, so not much older than you. It was interesting because I'd accidentally eaten some fish before I set out. Why do you eat fish in the middle of Africa? And then secondly, so you can imagine what happened and it affected me. I couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah, and the long drops are an interesting experience in themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. Secondly, then the tour company got us very lost on the first day. Like, goodness knows how they could do that because they go out probably once a week. And thirdly, of course, as you'll have found, it's really mind over body, isn't it? That
100%.
Last haul, the last evening, I don't know which route you went up, but you're getting up at 11 p.m. and then walking solidly for 7 or 8 hours. I actually walked past I dropped behind because my son, before he dropped out, and I carried on. I walked past the other people I was walking with and said, hello, and carried on. And I got to the rim and I couldn't find them because I'd walked past and hadn't noticed.
Oh, really? Yeah. And that's the thing. You've got these guys carrying all your bags and stuff like that, shouting on the way up, and you're just fighting your own internal battle, aren't you?
Exactly.
It's a crazy thing. But we'll set that aside for now. And I just want to kind of start in your kind of formative years, so kind of growing up. And we'll work our way through the timeline, maybe jump around a little bit. But just tell me a little bit about growing up and kind of your experience in your kind of formative years.
Yeah, so I had a fairly privileged upbringing. My father was a dental surgeon. You know, they earned well. He worked hard. It was piece week, so he was paid by the patient interaction. And we used to fly, or he used to fly our car over the channel. Can you believe that? Put it on in somewhere in Kent and drop it off somewhere near Cowley. So I assume it was very expensive. So yeah, I had a good upbringing. I went to what was called a direct grant school, which became a private school. I was very geeky, very, very shy, hard to believe nowadays. And I was part of a cohort that worked really hard, well together. So of the 60 or 70 of us in the sixth form, 18 of us went to Oxbridge. So, but I was so shy that I really didn't mix at all. I had 2 laboratories at home. I had a chemical laboratory and an electronics laboratory. So I spent an awful lot of time just sitting at home, and I've changed dramatically. But that's what the start was. And then I was just explained to your colleague that I actually moved out to Australia for 6 months between school and university. And I happened to spend some time with somebody who, if any of your audience are Australian, will know the name, Dick Smith. Dick Smith just had one shop in those days. This is now effectively the Richard Branson of Australia. Entrepreneur, successful entrepreneur and explorer as well. So some of his entrepreneurial enthusiasm, no doubt, rubbed off on me.
And I mean, you know, if we go back to a young Peter Cowley in his lab at home, for example, and you know, if you could just kind of say all of the incredible things that you've done. I mean, you know, you're an active investor in over 75 tech startups, and you know, dozens of technology companies yourselves. I mean, was that even on your radar? Did you even think that would be even close to what
what I did want to do was retire by the time I got to 35, which then got reset to 40. And then actually, in recent times, the reset to never, because I enjoy what I do too much. You know, so, but by retirement, financial independence, effectively, which I have achieved, but it took a lot longer than that. So no, it wasn't, nothing like that. I mean, I did do something entrepreneurial at university. I bought a traveling discotheque, and we ran that for a year and sold it again. So, but that was a little bit of marketing and customer interactions, a bit of accounting, things like that. Then I worked for a software company here in London that grew and grew and grew. It was a few hundred people when I joined. It was 40,000 when it finally sold itself. But I jumped off that conveyor belt in London after my brother tragically died young from cancer, and joined a small startup in Bavaria. So this was me wanting to get into entrepreneurial setting. So then at this point, I'm now 25 or something like that. So I'm not a very early. I've had I haven't been selling sweets in the, school or anything like some entrepreneurs have. Yeah. But it was clear I was on. By the time I got to about 18, 19, I was on a path.
Yeah, no, that's it. And I mean, with every person we speak to, there's always these little pieces to the puzzle that kind of start to show further along, their journey, their entrepreneurial journey, like you mentioned, the marketing and stuff like that you picking up. It's so interesting. And then what was your kind of first breakthrough, would you say, doing things by yourself as far as running a business goes? You mentioned that Bavarian startup, that didn't go exactly the way you would have liked it, shall we say. It ended up closing down. But when was the first time you said, right, I'm going to do this. I'm branching out on my own. I'm going to do it.
Yeah, the company I joined as an employee actually sold itself to Heckler and Koch, and two of us decided to set up on our own. And although that was my first startup, effectively, that did shut down, but not for long after I left. So Matt was born, who's now 40, in Germany, and our life changed dramatically. I wanted to own my company outright, or at least have a controlling share. I wanted to have it in English, and my German, although I can speak German, the written wasn't very good. And we wanted to be in the UK where we could own a house. And actually, we had a house in Islington here in London. And so the next step, apart from setting that up and helping build it for 3.5 years, was to set up Camdata, which actually celebrated its 40th anniversary a few weeks ago. I noticed you did a podcast with some 250-year-old business. This won't get that far, definitely, because my remaining son, isn't interested in it, so he will die at some point in the next few years. That was the first jump. So I was then 28. Came back to the UK. My girlfriend, wife, unfortunately the ex-wife, she had an environmental consultancy business, so we were both working from home and starting to build the companies.
No, it's a really interesting start, and like you said, kind of branching off to do it yourself is a big step. And then again, doing the research, there was something that you said that is really, really stuck with me, and that's where you decided to start scaling yourself. Tell me a little bit about your decision to scale yourself.
So that's much later. So a lot has happened before I got to that point. So companies grew, got to 30 people, went bust, grew again. I got mired in alcoholism. Come to that later, probably. Got out of that. Started doing a lot of charitable work. I started being some non-executive companies and so on. And then I bumped into angel investing. Once I got into angel investing and I'd learnt myself, I decided that I'd like to give back more than just one-to-one mentoring or 1 to 25 or 50 in a lecture hall. And so I decided to scale my experience and my method of delivery and what I could help with by doing something. And I thought of setting up a society for entrepreneurs, which of course we got here in London, which wasn't around at the time, or whatever, or some sort of conference. And in the end, I decided on a set of podcasts. So I co-founded it with Alan, my youngest son, and we did about 80 odd podcasts and wrote 2 books. And that was the scaling. So this is going from just talking to maybe a few hundred people a year to talking to tens of thousands of people a year.
Yeah. It's just that term I think is absolutely brilliant, because people always think of scaling businesses, but I mean, for you decided to take that leap and kind of scale yourself, which is absolutely brilliant. And we will hop around on the timeline a little bit, but I just want to come back to you and kind of starting your own businesses and kind of talking about them failing. And there's a brilliant thing on your website, which is exits and failures, because you're very, very open about where you've made mistakes and where things have gone wrong, or people that you've invested in have made mistakes, and you always put a reason as to why that you think that company's failed.
And I haven't been sued yet either.
Exactly. But I'm so intrigued because, things are definitely changing in the UK. It's obviously been a very big thing stateside of talking about failures and being more open about failures. Even people who are going through failures talking about, I'm actually messing this up, this is not going well. Your kind of history in business, we've got this perfect kind of timeline that you can kind of talk about. Is, do you think that the relationship with failure and talking about failure has changed since when you first started the business? And is there kind of a point that you can kind of point to where potentially that mindset has changed? Yeah,
I mean, it goes back a lot further than that, because in Germany, when I was there, a failing business was very negative. In fact, I was involved in importing a product from a company in Saarbrücken, which is in Germany, and the owner, or part owner, Geschäftsführer, CEO, actually went to prison. So, I don't know what he did wrong, but so in the UK, we sort of hide to some extent behind a limited liability company. So therefore, you have to have done something pretty badly wrong. But the fact that we're talking about it, and we've adopted some of this from the States because they're very much more open about failure, and they probably changed 15 years ago. The reason I'm so open is because I'm just generally very open, as we'll find out as we talk about other things about my life. Come from Yorkshire, a bit direct, things like that. I mean, the South Africans also, South Africans, and the Dutch, and there are plenty of other, but the UK and the south of England, we're not quite so direct. And I realised that by being open and, almost being vulnerable to something that actually would help others, because in the end, a great journey that's successful all the way, which also has its ups and downs, you learn less from that than a number of failures. So if you can share those failures in such a way that entrepreneurs will fail less, because that's what it's really about, failing less often. You will always fail on any entrepreneurial journey. If you fail less, you're more likely to have a successful result.
And I mean, again, we're talking about all these various places in the world that you've worked, obviously Germany, Australia, for example, that you've spent some time in. How much do you put into kind of this international journey that you've kind of been on? Do you pick up little bits about the way that people work in those places? And is there anything that you think maybe in the UK we could do a little bit better, which they do in X country, for example?
That's a big question, that's because that could do politics and investment, everything. No, I've just embraced traveling and learning and giving as well. I've spoken in about 40 countries worldwide, including Iran, actually, although that wasn't face-to-face. And I've picked up bits and pieces, as the Singapore entrepreneurial ecosystem developed. I was there in the early stages. I was, as you will probably notice, president of the European Business Angel Network, which is Europe itself, plus sort of greater Europe. We had Russia was a member, for instance, and quite a lot of the African countries. And so I've had access and contact, and I've hopefully helped I was in Cape Town in 2019, for instance, talking to angel groups there and angels and entrepreneurs. So yeah, I'm sure I've brought back stuff from my, not just giving, but also bringing that in, and that's helped with me helping others.
Again, we'll kind of stick with this angel journey that you've been on. Invested in over 75 startups, tech startups. That stat is pretty incredible, because I mean, that there's a ton of work that goes into these pre-investment and all that kind of stuff, and that's a big deal. When you I'm sure you've got countless pitch decks thrown at you wherever you went.
13 or 14,000 I've seen.
Absolutely unbelievable. So I mean, again, what do you kind of look for in a pitch deck that kind of, you've boiled down into those over 75 businesses that you have invested in? What do you kind of look for? Give us a little bit of an idea of that.
At the stage I invest, which is very early stage, maybe they only have a pitch deck, and maybe they have some piece of tech or something that's not even an MVP, a minimum viable product. I just look at the people, and I very strongly feel that you have an introductory slide and then you have the team. You don't part the team further down, or in, unfortunately, too many cases, forget the team altogether, because my mantra here is we invest in people with a plan rather than a plan with people. So you look at the background of the people, you look at what they've done, you look at whatever public data is available, LinkedIn, which of course is just a sales document. We all edit our own LinkedIns, don't we? We look at companies' house, I look at companies' house, I even look at social media sometimes. But I can soon work out whether the sort of background they have and what they've done means that it's worth taking it to the next stage. And the next stage is reading slide 3. It's as simple as that. So it's quite easy to discard something before you even know, in my view anyway, before you even know what they're attempting to do. Yeah. So it comes down to people, and the people need to be have had the right sort of background, so some experience. So investing in a undergraduate, just about impossible. Well, impossible as far as I'm concerned. A postgrad, possibly okay. They've learnt a bit about life. So the fact that they've got the right experience, they're coachable, which means that they listen, not necessarily to me, to others, and that they are honest with themselves. And the number of times they might think they're white lies, but they've ruined the investment due diligence process. You can't tell that just look at the deck, but as soon as you actually spend some time with the entrepreneurs.
Again, how quickly can you you've taken so many pitch decks, I'm sure so many people have pitched you in person. How quickly can you kind of sniff that out now? Do you think you've got it to a stage where
that's got difficult, because of course investment readiness and pitch practice has come on a very long way over the years, in the 15 years since I've been investing. And the charisma, you need an ability for at least one of the entrepreneurial team to sell well, but they've got in the end to execute, because raising the capital early is very commonly the easiest part of growing a business, believe it or not. And of course, somebody who's charismatic can sell well, there's no guarantee they can execute well on the growth of the business. Now, maybe the co-founders can help them do that. So they go out there and they sell equity to start with, bring some money into the business. Then they sell the vision to early employees, so that who won't be paid all that much, etc. And then they sell something to customers or partnerships, whatever. So that process, the selling process, is really important. But there are plenty of examples out there where charismatic people have raised money and not executed on it. WeWork, Theranos. There's a number of big examples where the charisma, and if you get sucked in by the charisma and believe they are the right one, then that is bad, actually. So somebody over pitching to be too slick actually is a negative sign.
When you're talking to these people, and you've mentioned how important honesty is. When someone says, that my last two businesses haven't worked that well, didn't quite work, do you kind of take that honesty about the failure as a positive, or is that something that is a little bit of a red flag as to running a business, or is it a mixture of both, would you say?
No, it's positive. It's definitely positive. I would rather invest in a entrepreneurs tried before and failed, providing they're open and honest about the failure and they don't blame it on anybody else, because it's almost never somebody else's fault. A big bad debt is actually their fault for advancing too much credit. A competitor coming up from behind and not noticing, it's their fault for not noticing it, etc. COVID is an example which is not really anybody's fault. You can't really predict that, as the government at the time in the UK proved. The fact that they're open and honest about the failure means they've been through the journey. They've made lots of mistakes. They've hired the wrong people and fired them too slowly, and all the other things. They've got their accounting system wrong. So no, that's definitely a positive benefit. That I'd much rather invest in an entrepreneur's tried before than a newbie.
If we're looking at it, it's 18 positive exits. Is that correct?
I think it's 20 actually. I don't know where you saw that.
So 20 positive exits. One of them yielded 107 times your original investment and returned all of the cash you've ever invested in one go, which is pretty incredible. But when you're looking at those businesses, those 20 businesses, are there like a few things that you think those companies have done well that you think you wish the rest of your portfolio would look at doing?
Yeah, if you look at the website, you'll see that the failures, the 21 failures, most of them hadn't reached product market fit before the investment dried up. And that's what the successful ones have done. They've either got themselves to the point where they can exit before they got to product market fit, and there is many examples of that where it's called acqui-hiring, if you know that term, where they're being bought for the team and the IP. Now, in some cases, that's almost a write-off for investors. In some cases, that's very successful. Or they found product market fit. And product market fit means you have a product or service that the market wants and will pay the right price for. So the contribution, the gross margin coming in will begin to run the business. Then you don't have to rely on investors. And they're the ones that can find that early, which you couldn't do if you're doing drug discoveries, for instance, but you find very early if you're doing a service business, which I don't invest in. Then the journey is so much easier.
The nice thing about yourself is you're also director on 40 plus boards.
Not now.
Yeah, you were. We'll get into that in a second. But you also the chair of the Cambridge Angels.
I was.
You've got these like little pockets of business community that are just so perfect and so helpful in a local community. Obviously, Cambridge is the center of the world, but at the same time, it's also a local area. Why was that, and kind of mentorship in general, and why was that so important to you throughout your journey?
Because I'm a people person. I love helping people in the same way that teachers and other people do that. I'm not alone by any means, but I get so much from them. I'm extrovert. I build my ideas. I have this mantra which is strong opinions weakly held. I don't know if you've heard that before. So I do have opinions. You need to have opinions if you're going to build a brand, if you're going to invest, but don't hold them too strongly, because otherwise you're not adapting to changing circumstances. So I've been very lucky. Sort of stumbled back into Cambridge. I wasn't really involved in the entrepreneurial scene when I was at uni, in the 70s, but I ended up coming back again for personal reasons, and it's the right sort of size. London, of course, has got much more activity, many more people contributing to entrepreneurialism, but they don't really know each other. It's just too big to get to know each other. So it's a bit like a village is Cambridge. And of course, if you cross with a village, you've got to leave, really, because the village soon gets to know that something bad is out there. So no, I've learned so much from being in the Cambridge community, the entrepreneurial community, the investment community. And I think I've given so much back.
Well, one of the things that we have to talk about is your new book, which has just come out. It's Public Success, Private Grief.
Yes.
It's such an unbelievable story that you're holding it up there. We will be sure to include a link in the show notes below this video. But I mean, your story is just one of adversity on steroids, effectively. It's an incredible story, and we'll kind of work our way through it. But the one thing that I do want to kind of start with is kind of, you mentioned your brother passed away due to cancer at a very, very young age. Take me back to the mindset when that happens. Because, I mean, you weren't necessarily, kind of established in business. At that age, you don't really know what you're doing with life anyway. Could you just take me back to how you felt, if you can channel that younger you?
Yeah, so I've spent quite a lot of time revisiting that during writing the book. There's been a level of catharticism in doing it, because I've had to re-look at myself. And the book was actually co-written with my wife, who's a professional translator. And she was the one that dragged out of me at times, because, I'm a bit geeky and a bit engineering scientific and so on, dragging out those emotions. So yeah, I was 23. I met my wife-to-be. We're both living in London. I was working for a software house, Logica, and my brother had been in New Zealand, had come back again. He was on chemo over here, and he died within a few months, something that almost certainly wouldn't happen nowadays. Medical technology has come on dramatically. We're talking about 44 years ago here. And I closed up a little bit, I think. The family wasn't very good at emotional discussions. My mother took to drink, although she came off it some years later. And I made a decision then, with my wife-to-be, my girlfriend, to escape, actually, to run away. And we went to Bavaria. And so, as I mentioned earlier on, I joined a small company there. So, yeah, I definitely was the product of a middle-class, being a male in a middle-class upbringing in, at that era in the 60s and 70s in the UK. I'm sure there are other examples which are completely different. My best man, for instance, is a very different character. I saw him this last week, actually, in Oxford. So no, that's taken a long time to come out. The grieving didn't really start for some years after he died.
We go through the rest of the story. You lost your sister to alcoholism, and tragically, you've lost two of your children to suicide. And I mean, when you kind of are going through the book, you mentioned it's quite cathartic, and you've been quite vocal about the importance of seeking professional help with very, very difficult situations that you're going through. But I mean, anyone would look at these in isolation, just one of those things that's happened, and really, really struggle with life. I mean, adversity, clearly you need it as an entrepreneur, and that's clearly within you. But how did you manage to get through each of these absolutely devastating instances that's happened in your life? I mean,
with some external help, with a gradual understanding of my own character and how I'm built. When Ian died in 2009, it took me a long time to work out my narrative, a lot of help from others, so I could move on. I still had a life. I didn't disappear into a ball in deep depression. With hindsight and with processing, and not just because of writing the book, I realized that it's not due to resilience or stoicism. It's actually due to, I believe, something called post-traumatic growth. This is the concept. We've all heard of PTSD, of course, and there's something called post-traumatic depreciation, which you can understand what that means. But growth is somehow these traumas, with the assistance of others and some internal processing, I've redirected my grief into other things. And that other thing is partly due to my addictive personality, alcoholism for many years, which I haven't had a drink for 24 years now. and being busy, but not being busy, doing something internal, being busy helping others. So somehow, and I'm not sure how that happened, why I ended up being like that in my upbringing. I can't really work that out, but I've actually used, and this is not through planning, this is through just how my coping mechanism or something. I didn't switch on and say, Ian's died, I'm going to help others. I developed into that. And of course, when Alan died 18 months ago, of which some of your audience might even have known, because he was, certainly in Cambridge, he's very well known, was very well known. That was much more tragic, in fact, because had been in business with him, I was working with him. So the struggle to build that narrative rapidly for my own sake, for the sake of all the people around me, my remaining son, Matt, etc. That's partly because I've got late-stage cancer, and I haven't got that long to live, statistically, and I wanted to get on with things. So I honestly can't explain this. It'd be very interesting to see if somebody who reads the book over the next year or two or whatever can actually come to me and say, Peter, this is how it happened.
All of these in isolation are just absolutely life-changing. But at the same time, like you mentioned, that alcoholism, do you feel that you going through the process of getting sober put things, almost the groundwork into place to be able to deal with these tragic events?
Absolutely. I definitely believe that. The 12 steps of AA and other organizations were a really important part of the process of getting to acceptance that it wasn't a matter of self-control, but also processing it in terms of going through my life and working out what I'd done wrong. So although it's not a psychological or a counseling process or a therapy process, it's a way of living one's life. And AA, and there's a whole chapter on how I interpreted AA in the book, actually, how I use the mantras and the sayings and the knowledge within the groups to actually affect other things in my life. And one of the big ones is regret. We all suffer from some level of regret, but regret is not a good emotion because you cannot do anything about the past. You can take the past, analyze it, learn from it, and not repeat mistakes or do things differently, but you can't change the past. And that, of course, the things I've thought about my two sons who died, what could I have done? What should I have done? And that could be so consuming that I could end up in a situation where, God forbid, I might even be thinking about taking my own life. I've never done that. Or picking up another drink. I haven't picked up another drink. So yeah, it's that process of recovering from alcoholism, which took me a long time. I call it the lost decade in the book. Those 10 years, I wasn't completely lost because I had a girlfriend, I had a semblance relationship with my parents and my children. I had a business. I was running a business. I was earning enough money to fund my addiction.
You've mentioned that you have been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and the prognosis is roughly 18 months, I believe.
Well, it's probably less than that now.
Less than that,
the thing about all cancer prognoses is all historic. They always come from data in the past. Medical technology is moving on, as we all know, extremely rapidly.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of research on this. I have a YouTube channel called Project Cancer, which is helping others, hopefully, with what I've learned. And there's a chapter of that in the book as well. And I actually, the other day, just saying how small Cambridge is, I met somebody who's in charge of the project for the next version of the drug I'm on. This is because AstraZeneca is based in Cambridge, and Cambridge is a small place, etc. So I'm hopeful that it will be okay. But if you there's about 200,000 of us on this drug at any one time. There's probably about 600,000 have been on it, have died. It's about 18 months from diagnosis to first mutation. I was about 18 months, and then the average journey with the studies is about 18 months to death. I'm already about 9 or 10 months into that. So I'm working on the basis that I might not have more than 9 months left. I know seem to be very cold about this, but I'm not. I am logical about it. But of course, my wife doesn't believe this will be true at all, of course. I'm also working on the hope that I'll stay alive long enough that something will catch up with me, because once you're dead, medical technology doesn't apply, clearly. So I'm just hoping, and also my positive attitude, they say will make a difference certainly makes a great difference to the people around me. And clearly, if I wouldn't be in this room with you, Josh, if I didn't have the sort of attitude I have.
And that attitude comes through 100%. And with something like this, it is inevitable. And like you mentioned, you were a board of over 40 companies, and you have to tie up those affairs and things like that. How have those conversations gone? And is there anything that businesses could be doing better to help maybe leaders who are leading with cancer? There's many, many examples of this. Goldman Sachs CEOs had cancer, unfortunately, but there's plenty of examples of this. Has anything kind of stuck out, things that you would like to kind of change in a business perspective in the way that workplaces handle cancer, specifically with leaders?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. In terms of the beginning part, is that I've still got 35 investments, and I've asked for a few secondaries where appropriate. So, of course, a secondary sale of shares in the angel-backed or VC-backed company is not easy to organise because it has to be offered to all shareholders, and there'll be heavy discounts. And I have had a few secondaries, and those are compassionate secondaries. Not that I need the money, because I've made enough money out of that, but I do want to unwind things, because when I die, there's 35 sets of shareholdings that need to be handled by people who don't. My son works outdoor activities in the school. My wife's a translator, I said. And so this just isn't the knowledge or wish or interest to do that. They'll just end up with a share certificate that they were just hoping to turn into a check at some point. In terms of the talking to the entrepreneurs, and the business leaders of these things, they obviously are sympathetic about it and will do what they can. But I don't think remember, you're not talking here about, because I've only got on one external board now. So when this all kicked off, I was on 7 external boards, and I've gradually come off those. So I can't really comment on the support of the business leader, because I'm not a business leader in these circumstances. I'm a business leader, inverted commas, in my tech business and my publishing business, and I've been working through how to cope with the continuation of those. But yeah, the more open we are, as this society in the UK has become over the last few years. I mean, look at the way the royalty, whether one is positive or negative about royalty, have talked about their own cancers recently. The more open, the less stigma there'll be, and then the more willingness to talk, and therefore the easier it is for people around to support.
You've already done pretty well in making sure that you are making the most of the months that you have. You've recently been to Antarctica, and I believe you've got a few more things on your list. Just tell us about kind of making the most of that time and your mindset about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've almost gone overboard to some extent. I've always been a great traveller. I've been to well over 80 countries, business and pleasure, but in a pleasurable way, not just going somewhere and coming back again the same day. And so I just increased that, and I've got the wealth, I've got the time. There'll be enough money left at the end, unless the 2 friends have said you'll go bankrupt. You'll live so long you go bankrupt if you spend like this, which may well be the case. So I decided. It took a bit of time for the diagnosis 2.25 years ago to feel okay. So nothing happened for the first few months, and I started embracing travel. So I've been to all 7 continents in the last year and a bit. I did 2 half marathons recently, one in Cambridge and one in Lisbon, actually, a couple of weeks later. And the book's taken up quite a lot of time at the end of last year, but I just intend to carry on doing the big trips. So next week, actually, on Thursday next week, we're hiking for 5 weeks in the American Rockies. And I live from 3 months to 3 months, so the 3 monthly scans now booked for June. If they work out, we're going to be in the Arctic, going around Svalbard, north of Norway. But on top of that, and I think this is mentioned in the book, I'm actually spending quality time with some very close friends, clearly with family, but also very close friends. So we're doing some unusual things. So for instance, I'm doing a butchery course and then a canal boat with a couple of friends. I was going to do a stand-up comedy course with somebody else, but we can't get the time right, so we're going to do a self-expression course of some sort. I'm doing a train trip through Switzerland with one, and it's not saying goodbye, because I might do it again next year and the year after, if they're willing to. It's a matter of just having that quality time, because in the end, life's about relationships, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I'm sure throughout writing the book and through this journey of kind of coming to grips with what's going on with the cancer diagnosis, etc., I'm sure legacy is something that's definitely kind of come into your mind. And what kind of legacy? I mean, you've already done incredible stuff with Project Cancer, and again, writing the book. And I know the proceeds go to papyrus prevention of young suicide. What would you want your legacy to be? Say in like 10 years' time, if we reflect on this interview with Peter Cowley, what would you like your legacy to be?
Yeah, so I've got some minor legacies. There's a couple of buildings, for instance. Buildings can be legacies I'm very proud of. One is the CAB, the Systems Advice Bureau in Cambridge, which is helping many more people. One's a 13th century cottage in Lincolnshire, which I did up and lost a lot of money on. So there's some buildings. There's obviously the children. But on top of that, there's how I've helped people. I mean, it's only people, I help people, probably the same for you, that if you've helped somebody, they don't normally tell you, unfortunately. You don't get as much feedback as you should. And so over the years, I've mentored probably 1,000 people, I suspect, so getting on for that. I don't get quite the feedback I'd like. Not that I'm, in any way I'd like to know, but it doesn't have to be known. But the big legacy, absolutely, is the book. That's why I put so much effort into it in the last year. I mean, not last year, last 6 months. A number of people have said, why bother? Why bother? Get on with life. You could be traveling more and everything. But it's important that it's out there, the word spread. And I hope, and we don't know this until people have read it, that it's inspirational. It'll help people, not specifically people who have got a cancer or alcoholism or tragically a suicide in their story. It'll just be coping with life. It's don't sweat the small things, this American phrase, just embrace life. There's a lot of things that people might take from it. I don't know what they'll be. It's not a guidebook or a handbook. It's read it, here's my story, you interpret it and learn from it if you can.
Highly recommend the book. It's absolutely incredible. And as I say, we've included the links to buy the book in the description. Final question for you. We are business leaders, so I have to ask you the question. What to you makes a great business leader?
All the people that I invest in, I believe will make great business leaders. So what is a great business leader? It isn't necessarily who Richard Branson, who builds up a massive empire. It's somebody who builds up a business which can stand on its own 2 feet. It's got a great culture internally. It's got good employee retention. It's doing something good for society if at all possible. And of course, the younger generation of entrepreneurs are wanting that more and more. So yes, a great business leader is somebody for those criteria I mentioned before. They're open, honest, and they learn. So. But also they know what they're emotionally aware enough to know what they don't know. And one of the comments I make to my CEOs, if I'm close to them on the board or whatever, you've got to grow faster than the business is growing. Otherwise, you won't be the CEO on the whole journey. You'll either move yourself aside or you'll be moved aside. So a great business leader is somebody who runs a great business which is culturally sound, is profitable, and it is doing something good for society.
Peter, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Do you have any final words for our business leader audience today?
No, I hope you've enjoyed listening to Josh and I today. I hope if you feel it's appropriate that the book might help you, then it's on Amazon, and there's a website called Public Success Private Grief, or ps-pg.com. And if you learn from that, do let me know, please.